Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the city council work session of Wednesday, January 11th to order. And first we need approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Next, we have public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make a comment? No? Anybody on Zoom?
Raise your hand if you want to speak. Nope.
Okay. So we will go ahead and start our presentation by CETA of our City Hall and Police Station Community Outreach.
Sure. I'll just do a quick introduction. We have two folks here from CETA. One is Leslie Jones. She's our project architect, and she would be doing a lot of the presentation tonight. The other is Jennifer Beatty, and she is the principal of CETA and is good enough to attend our meetings, and we appreciate it. And everybody up there is either from CETA or from Emmerich.
Yes.
Emmerich. Always the wrong one. Yeah. Anyway, so we have a good representation from the project team.
Good. Okay. Okay, for you to take it away.
So first off, I think we're going to pull up a document to share here, but I'd like to thank you all for inviting us to come. It has been an honor thus far to work on the community outreach and to get to hear from everybody who participated. I've been very impressed with the comments we've received and with the passion of the community and the involvement. It's really been pretty special for me to get to do this and to get to present it to you all this evening. Just to start at the beginning with an introduction of the project, it is the replacement of the City Hall and Police Station, so replacement of the building that we are currently in. Programs that will be included in the new facility include the police department, community development, administration, public works, IT, finance, emergency management, HREP, farmers market, and city council chambers. Hopefully I got them all there.
Leslie, can you talk a little bit louder?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tessa.
If I hit the button to move to the first slide.
Yeah.
Okay, just tell me when you want it.
Okay, thank you. So, where we've been today. Prior to CETA coming on board, there was a significant effort in initial analysis and feasibility. Part of that effort was an initial programming effort. Part of that was the site selection, which brought us to our understanding of the fifth site. Following that site selection, which was based on the previous analysis, CETA was brought on board to proceed. And our first step here was the community outreach effort, which is what will be why we're here tonight, what we'll be talking about. And I will be presenting what we've learned. The goal here this evening is to confirm next steps moving forward based on the information we gathered. So a summary of the community outreach program, we held 2 events. We use the term COE. So if you hear me say COEs, that's our acronym for Community Outreach Event. these were not meant to talk about design. We have not yet started that pen to paper what this facility will look like. Our intent here through this process was to listen to the community, to engage the community, and to get a better understanding of what was important to incorporate as we move forward through design. In order to maximize participation, our 2 events were held at different days and times. The first one was held in the evening of a weekday. Second one was held on a Saturday morning, in the hope to get as many people here as we could, to hear as many voices as possible. Oh, I think we both did it.
Yeah, you do it.
I was. So that first event was held October 25th in the evening. As I said, we had participation in person and we had participation virtually for those who couldn't attend. It was a fairly informal format for that first one. We wanted to limit how much we were prompting to get people talking about whatever was their priority. In all, we had 25 community members, either present in person or present via Zoom. We also compiled surveys which were distributed at the first COE event. They were distributed online, and I believe community members also took some surveys to distribute amongst their own communities outside of this meeting. Of those surveys that were distributed, we received 21 back. 11 of those came from people who also were in attendance at the meeting. As I mentioned, it was a pretty loose format. We provided at that meeting some initial information on the site, some initial priorities that we as designers think about before we start designing, and then people were allowed and welcomed and encouraged to share their thoughts and ideas. Also, at the first COE event, we opened up the building for building tours, so the community members who hadn't been to see the whole building could get a sense of what existing conditions are. Any questions at this point before I move on? One thing I didn't mention on that previous slide, in total from that first event, we got 132 comments. So 132 comments that we were able to delineate. That's from all sources, including in-person events, letters, and emails following the event. So our methodology to go through all of those comments. We went back to the office with those comments, and our first step was to categorize them. So we grouped the comments where they seemed appropriate to us, where they were talking about the same topic. That was our first step. We created stickers, infographics that aligned with each of those groups. So every survey we got back, every comment got a sticker applied to it, more or less. The notes that were taken at the event, we did the same thing. Another thing I didn't mention at that COE1 event is we had design team members here in our yellow vests. And during the tours, we mingled, and each member of the design team took notes on anyone with whom they spoke. And so those notes were also something we took back to the office. We typed them up and we applied these infographic stickers to help categorize by topic. After that step, the second step here is we filtered that information. It was important to us that every voice got an equal platform, so that the voices, the loudest voices, we didn't want to dominate. We want to acknowledge the quieter voices. And so we looked at the notes in person, we looked at surveys, and where a comment was coming from the same person, we filtered out those duplicates. After that, we counted them all up and prioritized them in terms of how many people, how many voices we heard saying a particular thing or addressing a particular topic. After we filled all that information, we had 41 community members represented, 41 voices, and that is from all sources, so from surveys and emails and in-person comments. So here's our categories. These are the 8 topics that we identified coming out of that first event. The percentages listed there and the pie chart below represent the number of people who brought up ideas under each of these topics. The list there is in order of how many people address the topic. So safety was first on the list with 76% of people we spoke to said something about site safety. A large percentage of that site safety was about the risk of a tsunami event at this site. Then we had improved working conditions and departmental needs. This topic is about providing healthy work environments to the people who are employed in the facility. And in addition to that, providing particular needs for various departments that have specialized tasks or needs. A couple of those departments are the police department and HVAC were talked about that have particular either with HVAC, particular ventilation needs or other very specific departmental needs. The third topic here, welcoming and transparency. These topics are about how the new facility will relate to the community overall and to Midtown in particular. So there was a emphasis here on being welcoming and inviting the community in. The fourth topic is design considerations and aesthetics. So comments regarding what the facility would look like. The next topic is parking and traffic, talking about parking on site, talking about impacts to traffic in the surrounding area, talking about traffic in general and parking needs off season and on season. The next topic is sustainability, how this new facility will build responsibly in terms of the environment, so incorporating sustainable elements as being an important aspect. Financial impact is next. That's 15% of people we spoke to commented about the cost in some form. And finally, a couple people addressed the schedule. So how quickly this building would get built or the time frame for the construction. And these are the same percentages you see represented in that pie chart. We'll get into more detail on the same information in the next few slides, but before I do that, any questions so far? Okay. So these next couple slides are broken down by each community member that we spoke to. Community members are numbered here 1 to 41, the number of voices we heard. And if each community member made a comment on one of these topics, it's indicated with the corresponding dot. The highlighted lines here are community members who spoke on a single topic. So the pink lines represent people who addressed only safety as an item without addressing any of the other areas. The one in the middle, the gray line, is someone who only spoke about improved working conditions and departmental needs. This next slide is very similar, representing the other community members. So of note, a topic that stood out to us based on these two slides were the number of people and the emphasis on safety. As I said, is related particularly to a potential future tsunami event. We found in this category topics of two varieties. One topic about finding potentially a new site, of objecting to this location as having too high of a safety risk and advocating for looking elsewhere. The other type of comments we were hearing under this category was comments related to making this site safer. So mitigation strategies and what that looks like on this site. At this first COE event, those types of comments were split about evenly, about 50% to 50%. Ultimately, after the COE2, there was a shift in that percentage. There was a shift over time of more people talking about advocating for a new site selection process. So ultimately, of all of our data in aggregate, there was about a 60% number of comments about site selection and a 40% number about site mitigation. And that takes us to our COE2 event. And I will keep pausing and asking for questions, but of course, interrupt me too if something comes up. So community outreach event number 2. Walking away from that first outreach event, we knew we wanted to dive deeper into these topics. So the community outreach event number 2 was formatted differently. It was a far more structured event. It is the one that was held on a Saturday morning. It was held November 12th. Again, we had people here in person from the public, and we had participants virtually via Zoom. There were 28 community members represented at the second event. Some of these were repeat people from the first event. Some people were able to attend both. Again, when we got the comments back, there was some filtering to make sure that each community member was represented distinctly. We received 186 comments coming out of this COE2 event. Format that we decided to go with, as I said, was much more structured. We set up stations around this room based on those topics that we identified from the first COE. The stations are listed there. They're an infographic that we used to analyze COE1. When people came to the event, they were handed a name tag with a number written on it, 1 to 7, or 1 to 6, actually. And that was the group, the station where they started. And then we allocated 10 minutes at each station. Bruce was kind enough to hand me a cowbell, picture there, that was run after.
Credits for that picture.
In the final version.
Yes.
So each station, each group talked at each station for about 10 minutes and then rotated around the room. Every person had the opportunity and was encouraged to speak to specific topics.
Can I interject for 1 second? The reason we gave people the numbers on the name tags was so that if you came in as a pair, you wouldn't go to the stations together. And some of that is off this philosophy that if you you're then with different people. So the dynamic would shift. And that's one of the reasons that we were giving people name tags and numbers that as they came in.
That and to get everyone around evenly so that people didn't go directly to the station that they were most passionate about, but were encouraged to give other ideas as well. We found it a very successful format. We were able to elicit more comments from people, and the comments were more detailed. And so my belief is it's really these comments from COE2, many of them, that we will be able to take into next steps and design and evaluate for implementation. In aggregate, from all of the sources in both COE events, we heard from 54 community members. And that's not the jump from COE1, it's not double. We were starting to see some overlap. So that's why the smaller increase is based on our filtering out of voices. 6 groups here. I didn't address the 7th group, which was Jennifer's group. The participants who were not able to be here in person, who were here on Zoom, formed their own 7th group and talked about all of the topics facilitated by Jennifer in lieu of walking around the room.
We heard the cowbell though, so we could go.
Before we get into the detailed data from COE2, I want to talk about subtopics really quickly. Those are the subtopics under each broad category. So things under parking and traffic, per se. Individual ideas under that are what we're referring to as subtopics. Beyond our 8 main categories, what we found and what you'll see here shortly is that some subtopics were heard across multiple categories. The subtopics that we heard across multiple categories are what is listed here. So materials is one. We heard voices of materials related to design considerations and aesthetics. So what materials we would use on the building, but we also heard people talk about materiality in terms of sustainability, inside both visually present materials and then environmentally responsible materials. Scale was also brought up over multiple categories. We heard comments about scale in terms of financial impact. So how big the building needs to be as it relates to its monetary expenditure, but also scale we heard about in terms of aesthetics and fitting into the community. Art is another one we heard across multiple categories, and that was a desire to incorporate art into the facility in some manner, whether that's rotating art exhibits or whether that's site elements. People talked a lot about that. Maintenance is another one. There was maintenance in terms of financial concern. So choosing high durable materials that will limit maintenance and increase the longevity of the facility, and also maintenance as relates to environmental impact and sustainability. We heard funding across multiple categories. As I mentioned before, there was comments about the overall project budget, and here sustainability as well. And security came up across multiple categories. So security as it relates to parking and police vehicles was something we heard. Also, in terms of departmental needs, security of staff, security of secure information. So making sure that sensitive information is protected. One other thing, I'm going to go back for just a moment. We did end up bundling a couple of the groups into a single station during COE2. So we bundled sustainability and financial impact into a single station. People were generally talking about that together. And we bundled safety and schedule into a single station. People spoke about together. In our minds, these were logical pairings as they were ideas that were closely linked. I will say, as we go through the data, there might have been some influence of that bundling may have impacted to some degree the data we collected. So these next series of slides breaks down what we heard in each of the stations. And I can run through these pretty quickly. Again, stop me if anyone has questions. Parking and traffic, ideas that we heard are listed at the bottom. The percentages of the pie graph dedicated to each idea is based on the number of groups who brought up that idea. So out of the 7 groups, the first idea was to bring shuttle service to help with seasonal parking needs. 4 of the 7 groups brought that up. The next one is the separation of public and private parking on site. There's three groups talked about that. The availability of parking during peak seasons was a concern for 3 of the groups. Security of police parking was discussed by 2 groups, and 2 groups also discussed where on this site specifically would make sense to provide parking. So that last one was more about a design conversation of site layout. The next one is design consideration and aesthetics. So the first one here is to maintain the character of Midtown. That is 7 of the 7 groups. So all of the groups addressed maintaining Midtown character in the design and aesthetics. Utilizing natural materials that match Cannon Beach, that one is 6 of the groups. Provide connections to nature, was brought up by 5 groups. Provide visual separation of building functions, was talked about by 4 groups. Making sure that the building would be welcoming to pedestrians, was 4 groups. Keeping the building cost effective while not entirely in line with design considerations and aesthetics was brought up at this station by 2 of the groups. Keeping the scale of the building relative to Cannon Beach and the surroundings. Incorporating local artists. Providing separation of public and private parking. Again, this one is one that came up elsewhere as well. And being considerate of surrounding residential neighbors was also brought up by one of the groups. Next is providing a facility that will be welcoming and provide transparency to the functions in the building. In terms of being welcoming, 6 of the 7 groups spoke here about the location and the tsunami impact, and sharing about the potential tsunami impact. We will talk about more when we get to safety, but it is an idea that was talked about at multiple stations, something that was on a lot of people's minds. 5 of the groups here also spoke about maintaining the look and feel of Midtown and considering the need for different departments, being welcoming and transparent to staff. The incorporation of the history and culture of the area was brought up by 3 groups. Continued information to community members was brought up by 3 groups as another way to be welcoming and transparent. Visual connection and access to departments was discussed by 3 groups. Access and sensitivity to natural surroundings. the incorporation of local artists, consider location of parking and pedestrian access. Similarly here, making this pedestrian-friendly development. And also one group discussed being considerate and respectful for the residential neighbors in the design. Improved working conditions and departmental needs. Here, 6 of the groups discussed the separation and security of different building functions. This is how the various departments relate to one another and their needs. Providing a health and safe work environment. 5 of the 7 groups discussed that. Providing space for seasonal growth was discussed by 3 groups. Departmental amenities. These are the department-specific items that were brought up. The couple listed here are providing a washer dryer, providing a cleaning space. HRAP was a big department that had pretty specialized needs. 2 groups talked about providing access to nature. It would be for staff as it relates to this particular topic. Providing secure and stable storage areas in a tsunami event. The separation of public and private parking areas was discussed by 1 group, and visual connections and ease of navigating the space. I agree. This next slide features both sustainability and financial impact, and this was combined into a single station. So we are presenting that together. One thing that we noticed is that the comments we received from the people in person seem to me to be impacted by the combination of these 2 topics in a single station. Many of the in-person comments received related the 2 and talked more heavily about the financial implications of implementing sustainable elements. I think when we reviewed the comments from the group 7, from the people who participated via Zoom, we were hearing more positive sentiment about incorporating sustainability independent from its cost. So in terms of sustainability, 5 of the groups talked about incorporating solar or other alternate energy options. We heard about transparency about sustainable options and their costs. So it's a request, I think, to involve the community as we move forward. Sustainability as an expensive thing, 4 of the groups talked about the cost of it. Sustainability and salvaged building materials, so potentially using recycled or salvaged materials. Lead cost versus benefit was discussed by 3 of the groups. Consideration of day-to-day impact on building use was discussed by 3 of the groups. 2 groups talked about the availability of financial grants and incentives. 2 groups here also talked about building functionality during a tsunami event. So here the idea was, if the tsunami risk is high enough and will impact the building, is that a consideration in regard to sustainability, if some of the building will be damaged based on the location. And then one of the groups talked about maintenance and systems related to sustainability. Financial impact here, 5 of the groups talked about the financial impact of the chosen site versus the tsunami risk. So here, I believe this topic is about the cost of providing the building here. It's a significant financial, it's a big project for the community. So community members wanting to make sure that the money is wisely spent. 4 of the groups talked about the overall project budget and being considerate of who is paying for the project. 3 of the groups talked about the size of the building versus the cost of the building. So this brings us back to scale versus cost. And 3 of the groups also questioned whether too much is being incorporated into one project. There was one group that talked about the cost of temporary workstations during construction. So there were questions I think will be coming about where people go, where staff will work during the construction of the project. And there were questions about the benefit to the city versus the cost of the project. And finally, one group talked about how maintaining the building will affect the project costs. So cost over time was discussed by one group. The last of these stations was a presentation about safety and schedule. This happened to be my station at COE2. So this one, I remember the conversations about. 6 of the 7 groups talked about the location of the building in the tsunami zone. 5 of the groups discussed building height as it relates to tsunami risk. So discussion of building height as it relates to tsunami risk is one of those items I spoke before about being a mitigation strategy on this side. There was talk about separation and security of employee parking. Part of this topic was about, I believe, confirming emergency vehicles were functional in the case of an emergency. Groups talked about access to emergency response in a tsunami event. Questions about the emergency response component of the facility in particular, making sure that that remained functional. 4 of the groups talked about infrastructure costs and losses, potential losses in the case of a tsunami. 3 of the groups talked about police safety and security. This is a comment separate from the tsunami risk, but regarding safety. 3 of the groups proposed potentially locating some programs elsewhere. So splitting off some departments and locating elsewhere and limiting what services are provided from the site. The one group also talked about requested communication about the event being designed for. So the size of the tsunami that would inform the design. There was the request here for further communication on that topic. The comments we got about schedule here were primarily questions. There were questions about the timeline for construction. How long would the community be disrupted by construction here? A couple groups questioned where city employees would go during construction, whether this building would remain here and remain operational during construction, or whether there would be temporary facilities. And finally, how the roads and parking would be impacted by construction. So that is a summary of all our comments during COE2. This is similar to the graphic we looked at for COE1. It's the same information presented graphically different. We did not organize the COE2 comments by individual. We organized them by group because the nature of the conversations in each group was more collaborative. And so each dot represents one of those items I just spoke about and how many groups addressed it. The highlighted lines in gray represent those topics I spoke about that we heard about from multiple groups. That's the first three topics. And these are the last four topics. The dashed lines there again are the groups that were combined into a single station. Last slide here of those last two groups. So in summary here, this is the last slide. I'd like to reiterate how proud I am to have been part of this conversation. And also in general, finally, walking away from all of this, I am left with the impression that there is robust community support for the project. I think our voices in aggregate acknowledge the need for a new facility. There's, as you've heard, concerns about some of the risks associated with this site. But that said, I thought that I was impressed with the support for the project to move forward. Questions on all that?
I think you all did a great job pulling out each of the pieces and attributing a value to it based on how many times it got brought up. That's excellent. It's something that'll keep guiding us through the project. So it was well done.
So I think for this evening, Bruce, interrupt me if you want to, but I think for this evening, what we would like is confirmation of our next steps moving forward. So I alluded at the very beginning of this, that this site was selected previously by the council based on like community input. What we're asking for tonight is confirmation of that decision so that we can move forward with next steps.
And I can touch on that a little bit. When we go back and look at what's happened in the past, there was a lot of time, a lot of information, research that was done on all of the sites. And no site jumped out and said, this is the best one. And a matter of fact, I think it was Councillor Ogilvie that came up with the term, the best of the worst. And so that was it. I mean, there was no ideal site. So it's like, okay, which is the best one? And their attributes were all different enough. But there was a lot of money, a lot of time was spent researching, and the council spent a great deal of time. And frankly, it was a very difficult decision to make. And so we never really got that decision. You know, we continue talking about programming elements and things like that, but we never got that decision on the site. And at some point, in an effort to try to get the project to move along, staff had a discussion at one of our meetings. And we said, of all of the sites that we have and the unknowns and those things, we could make this site work if that was the decision, you know, of the council. And that was looking at it from some of the criteria, like they wanted to keep, folks wanted to keep City Hall on an important location within the city, accessible, those kind of things. We recognized the tsunami risk. And part of the thought least my thought on the tsunami risk was that if you look at the risks that we have, our risk for a seismic event is higher than the risk for a tsunami. And that's as far as like a frequency. So there are seismic events all over Oregon, down into California, offshore, that are 6, 7 events, 6.0, 7.0 events approaching that level that don't necessarily generate a tsunami. And there can be a seismic event that is further inland that wouldn't affect the water at all. So it seems that there's clearly a huge threat if a Cascadia event occurred. And I'm recalling these numbers from memory, which is always dangerous for me. But I think there were 18 Cascadia events in 10,000 years. And of those, 3 were, in the category of the big ones, like 8, 9.0s. 12 or 15 of them were medium or less. And so when we put all those things, you're going to have maybe 18 events, or in the past, it's been 18 events over 10,000 years. And several of those would not have, risen to medium or above. That you're talking about maybe 6 and 10,000 years versus I don't know how many we're having or we might have that are just pure seismic events that don't generate a tsunami. And so in trying to say, okay, which is the risk that we need to prepare for more, kind of came to the conclusion, or at least I did, that you've got a higher level of the likelihood of an earthquake to doing damage than you have of the tsunami. If it's a tsunami, we lost. But there's also a term that's used in trying to cite, whether it be for hurricanes or tsunamis, there's a term called buying down the risk. And so we have a number for that. There was one site that was over by the RV park, and that had some of its own issues, but that was higher than what this site is. So if you're trying to deal with the criteria that we've had, we're trying to deal with the tsunami, that's probably a little better. But to give you an example of the buying down the risk, the South Wind site is much higher than any of those other sites that we have. But South Wind, when you're talking about buying down the risk, at the time we were looking at about a $16 million project. But because of the conditions and slide conditions in that location, in fact, there's no utilities up in that location at all. When we got the information from ODOT regarding what kind of road access we would have to provide, all of a sudden you've got the cost of buying down the risk was $16 million, because it was $16 million to build in a site like this, and it was 32 to build in a thing that historically we don't think that the water has ever reached that high. So we have an answer if that is the most important thing. If we're looking at it and saying, well, that's not a risk that we can buy down necessarily, although we could provide information on it. Because I need to get a little bit into the financing. With the financing, at the time that we started the project, we were looking at having the prepared food tax, the revenues from that, pay 100% of the debt service on the project. That situation has changed a little bit because project cost, construction costs, material costs, all those things have gone way up, as has the cost of financing. And so now I don't think that we'll be able to necessarily pay for 100%, but we can work towards that between design changes and whatever, but that number is now higher on that as far as trying to provide that kind of funding. So that means that if we are going to spend more, then we have to look at other opportunities for the funding. And we're going to need to make some funding decisions relatively quickly. So does that mean that we completely cut back the project, which is possible? There's certain goals that I want to have it meet. So that's one part. Do we ask the residents to pay for a bond, pay the difference in the debt service? That's something possible that we can do, but that was something that we were trying to avoid. So that's part of the cost implications of these decisions. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So from a question standpoint, what we need to get from the council is, are you comfortable with the decision process that's been made so far? Because people are questioning and saying maybe we need to give more weight on the tsunami side. That's a possibility. Or I'm sorry, I kind of lost my track there, but is this council ready to move forward with what has been done so far? Or are you inclined to look at the tsunami aspect again? And if we're going to do that, no problem. I have a suggestion on how we could do it, but it can't be like another 2 years like it was the first time. And we've got project financing that can be separated, but the project financing for Cannon Beach Elementary was tied to this project. And there's an element called cost of issuance. And that's all the costs associated with trying to do a bond issue. And there's savings if you can go ahead and do one bond issue and kind of combine your costs of issuance. We don't have to do that. That was our plan earlier. So we can't wait forever on it. Right now, the plan is to include the Cannon Beach Elementary financing on the bond issue for City Hall. And also we have about $100,000, something less than that in the budget right now that is allowing us to move forward with this design. We have an architectural firm on board. We have a construction management firm on board, and we're going to start spending significant money as we start looking at design and those kind of things. The thought was always to use bond money to repay the general fund for that. But so I think it's $900,000 is what we have budgeted now to be able to move forward. So we can't wait a year for the decision without significantly modifying our schedule and also our contract commitments.
Let's take this an issue at a time.
Sure.
You're combining a lot of things in there. But let's talk about, definitely. Yeah. I think we need to have a conversation about site.
I think we do too.
I'm more than willing to have it. At this point, I stand by my decision about having the building here. I appreciate that the public is concerned about it. I'm concerned as well. But I think this is a discussion that we've been having for the past 2 years. And as Bruce indicated, this was a safe place in as much as we could accept a certain amount of risk. Beyond that, I'm sorry, I can't promise beyond that. But I think for the reasons already laid out, that I'm still supportive of building on this site.
And I agree with Brandon. I mean, we studied it up one side and down the other. We had citizen committee look at it. We looked at all the costs. We looked at the benefits of each site. We looked at the problems with each site. Southwind was just deemed too expensive to even think about because of the slide issue. And it became, it was a unanimous vote by the former city council. And it was deemed the best, as Anna said, the best of the worst. I mean, it was a compromise site. And I just can't see us going through that whole study all over again. We just frankly don't have the time or the money to do it anymore. I mean, I feel comfortable that we have thoroughly discussed it and looked at it.
It does look like a challenge, reading through the comments. I wasn't doing it too scientifically, but it seemed like we had, let's move it away from the danger. And we had, let's keep it in town. It's hard to argue with either of those, but this past council and previous councils have discussed this question in depth for not just the past 2 years or 4 years, but for probably 2 decades. And we keep ending up in the same place, literally. So I don't know if there are other options. There were a lot of options in the comments about, can we keep those day-to-day operations here and move emergency operations somewhere else? Of course, what does that do to costs and 2 projects instead of 1? So it raises a lot of questions, but it might be something to explore. I don't know. Do you have any comment on that? And you wanted to say something else?
Yeah, well, on that particular, one of my highest priority, I think it is the highest priority, is that if something was to happen, if it's a seismic event, or if there's a tsunami, whatever, the people here, all of our residents, all the visitors are going to be at the worst they've ever been in their life as far as the conditions. And what we used to do in Florida, what we learned going back to Hurricane Andrew, is that you can't do it yourself. You need to bring in what you call the cavalry. And so the response was based on how quickly could people that were outside of that zone get in here to go ahead and do things. My concern with where Cannon Beach is located is that we have, I guess I look at 3 locations, and that would be coming across Youngs Bay Bridge, coming out 26 with all the bridges associated with that, or going down 101 and all the bridges associated with that. And if any of those bridges goes, they're not going to pop back up in the next couple of days. It's going to be years before they can be, because all the bridges are going to be prioritized that were torn out. And so there's no cavalry to come, or no normal way that you would figure the cavalry would get here. We talked about helicopters, and the folks that run the helicopters said, we can't get to you on 1 tank of gas. And there's no airport between, and it's Redmond. No, I think it is Redmond. But from Redmond Airport to here, you can't get here with a helicopter. And so they could probably do something with getting Coast Guard from other places, maybe. But are we the first place they're going to go ahead and send those resources? Or are they going to send them over to Portland? One of the things that startles me is that pretty much all the gas for the Pacific Northwest comes into Portland. And all those giant tanks, the gas tanks, they were built before seismic requirements were put in place. So are they going to go there to go ahead and address all the things that are going to happen with that? All the buildings we hear about in Portland that are built so high without seismic retrofitting, all that. So I'm saying, okay, now I'm looking, for this place, how likely are we to be saved by the cavalry? Or are we going to be dealing with our own resources and relying on ourselves? And so if we're going to be relying on ourselves, I want to have a really good emergency operations center so we can be at our best. And we won't have a lot of staff here even, but we can be working with volunteers or whatever. But I want, I don't want to build an EOC, Emergency Operations Center. Right now, this is our emergency operations center. That's why we see, we got the monitors and all these other things. So I want that to be the chamber. And then we don't have to build it twice. If we were to say, okay, let's build the things that are not necessarily, that are more critical during an event, then we would build two chambers, the equivalent of two chambers. And one would sit for I don't know how many years before it would be used. Because it would be set up as an emergency operations center. And if that's what its use is, that's what it would need to be there for. So we're talking about higher costs. And we're not going to have that many people. We don't have that many employees that live in the city. But the ones that we have and being able to work with volunteers and other, we'll be able to go ahead and start doing some things, but we have to know what's happening. We've got to be able to communicate. All of our communications are tied to this building. This building goes down. Our communications is lost. And it's not easy to go ahead and reset it up. And so anyway, that's the big thing. I don't think that we're going to see the cavalry. I don't for a long time. I don't think that a lot of the potentials for the cavalry are realistic. We all got kind of excited when the hovercraft showed up. I don't know how many people went to that exhibition, but it was pretty cool. The hovercraft comes in, it's got trucks on it, it's got all this kind of stuff. But when we talked to the people that were involved with the ship, they said from the time we started working on this mission, it took us 2 weeks to get to your shore. Okay. And they knew this was coming. So they were able to gather things and all that. He said, I have no idea how long it would take if we were in Guam. So, and I mean, how many times, and if they show up with 4 trucks, 8 trucks, who gets them all the way up and down the coast? I'm not sure we would be at the top. So I
Back in on,
yes, well, you asked me and you probably regret having asked me that
yeah,
question.
I already do.
Yeah, sure. But I thought about this a lot and I think about it a lot.
I think having the emergency operations center here is what's concerning people. And we are talking about making it survivable for a certain level of seismic event, especially a major tsunami event. Again, we're going to have bigger things to worry about.
Yeah.
Just basic survival for a period of time, as you're bringing up. But I think after doing a tour of the emergency operations and the emergency operations backups and contingencies, I think a lot of the community would understand a lot better that we do have those backup communications in place. So if we lose this site, we go to the next best site, which I believe is the Public Works Yard. Then we go to the next best site, and we do have communications thanks to what's been happening the last couple of years throughout town. So we've kind of got those backups and contingencies that I think we need to at least be a little more comfortable that we're prepared for that major event.
Okay, and I strongly disagree. The size of the building, of the EOC that is at the Public Works Yard is maybe the amount of just that where that seating is. It's probably going to be less. We don't know how well the Public Works Yard is going to hold up. There's a water tank above it. It's going to flood down there possibly. It's also underneath the power lines. And so I would not say that, well, if we have a good one set up here, and if it doesn't happen, it's going to be almost the same going over there. It's not. And I just care about how well we will perform when people are at their worst. And if that's a risk that you're willing to take, that's okay. That's why you guys make the big bucks.
Well, to me, now you're making the case for moving Emergency Operations Center somewhere else.
Possibly, but I think that from the risk standpoint and what it's cost to go ahead and buy down the risk, I don't think the tsunami is our worst enemy in this. I think a seismic event without a tsunami is. And anybody can agree or disagree on that.
We have Curtis on the line if anybody wants to.
And Lisa is on also now.
So if anybody would like to ask specific structural questions, he is available. I know we're in the weeds to that point, but he wanted to be available.
So Lisa, is there anything you want to say?
Well, I agree with Gary that the seismic event is really what the big issue is. More so, obviously a tsunami is as well, but the seismic event, we don't even know what would be left, what would be standing, what roads there would be. We know nothing. Seismic events can be totally unpredictable and powerful. And I think that in the case of a tsunami, we have 3 cache sites to get to, which are just as easy to get to as getting to City Hall if you live in the north end or the south end. So, in fact, easier if you live on either of those ends to get to than to City Hall. So I'm curious about, I know that you want to keep the emergency center intact, but we also have those cache sites, which have communications as well, people on radios, etc. I'm curious to hear, I would love to know what Rick Hudson thinks about the site, if he has an opinion.
Is that a direct question?
Yes.
A time direct question.
What are you asking me directly? Because I get confused sometimes listening to all of the conversation. Do I approve this site for Emergency Operations Center? No.
Yes.
If I was just building an EOC or a police station, it wouldn't be here. But that doesn't mean that we're talking about City Hall. When I first came here, this building existed with an unknown time frame of 2 decades of council being stagmired and making a decision. And so I started building alternate plans. This whole thing is about alternate plans for me. But if you're asking a question, would I build an EOC here or put a police station here? No, this is not the right site. But at the same time, is the EOC connected to City Hall and a police station? Is that the conversation? Is that how it has to be? That's not a decision for me to make. That's for you guys to make. But if you're asking me about Emergency Operations Center surviving here, no. It's the best site because we commingle all of our facilities because we have to. So that makes the most sense when Bruce is talking about an adequate facility that's big enough to run an EOC. It's going to end up being the council chamber. But is that really, if you're making a standalone EOC, would it be here at a City Hall? If you only had one, I wouldn't put it here.
Where would you put it?
I'd put it on Spruce Street. Best site in the city that is close to downtown to operate is on Spruce Street.
You mean in the Sitka Spruce Reserve?
In that footprint, it's the highest footprint in the city on this side of the freeway. Unless you go south, unless you look at alternate locations.
And I don't think that this, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to say, thanks a lot, Rick. Now I'm really ambivalent. Yeah, I thank you so much for being honest, though. It's interesting to hear that. And I respect, your analysis very much. So, yeah, now I'm really concerned.
I think that it's not possible to have that kind of a conversation in a short amount of time. I think that my experience is I come to a different conclusion than Rick. I think that the cache sites are amazing as they are. I think that they are useless as an EOC. They're a place where people can come and get fed. But if we're gonna lose everything here, I'm not sure how well everything is gonna be working, because the building that we're talking about building would be called a risk category 4. And what that means is that, well, I'll compare it to a risk category 2, which is more like a department store or something. That building is designed to fall apart slowly so people can get out. Okay? Our cash sites aren't even in a category that you can say it would be similar, that there's a risk category to them, unless it's maybe 0.5 or something. But if you have that situation, we would, the risk category 4 is that the building withstands the seismic event and it is ready to use right away. That means that the radio systems, all that stuff is set up, backed up by generators. The building, the offices, there's power right away, all those things that you need to really run a site. If we have a situation that I don't know how, if something is going to go ahead and seismic event destroy a category 4 built structure, I don't know how something that you put up together in a cache site could be any comparison. And what happens when you have these kind of events is that you are knocked back to the Stone Age. And so if I want to talk to the mayor, I have to find her. And so I can ask around, say, has anybody seen Barb? And look, and you might have moved, but that's where we are. I won't be in a car. I'll be walking, plodding through. Those are the conditions that we'll have. People will have, buildings on top of people. We won't be able to, unless we have a place that really has information, like what a map of the city, that every time somebody calls in a CERT member or somebody and says, this building has somebody in it, we mark it. And then the people, and then if the road is blocked, we mark it. So that when we're making decisions, we can tell people how to get around, where they will be, where they can get through, where they can't get through, so don't even try. And you're not going to have that at the cache sites. The site at Public Works is going to be extremely busy with other functions, trying to get utilities restored and all that. And again, the room is tiny. And the building is not a risk category 4. And so if a new building, wherever we build it, risk category 4 fails, the Public Works building will not survive. So I think that we've got some good capabilities that we didn't have before Rick got involved. Definitely there's a big step up with the cache sites, and definitely with our communications. I think he's done a great job with all of that. But I don't think that system has been tested to the point that I would say you can rely on us under those conditions to be at our best.
Those are backup options.
And can I add something to that?
Sure.
Regarding the building design, as I understand it. So first thing to clarify is, as we proceed with design, my understanding is that we will be designing to the risk category for seismic and wind events. The most stringent occupancy level for those seismic and wind. The other thing regarding programming and building size, I wanted to make sure it's clear, is what I understand is that the Emergency Operations Center will occupy the same building square footage area as the council chamber. So whether or not that the EOC is at this facility or elsewhere, our intent is to make that a redundant and flexible square footage in terms of the building. So if we remove just the EOC component, the building that you're building here is likely the same or close to the same size. What I understand the EOC component to be primarily is those additional communication functions that would be incorporated within the room that we will design anyway for the city hall function.
And I took a couple notes during this conversation, and to complicate the conversation, right? Why not? If we separate it into 2 buildings, you will have duplicate pricing. So you will have duplicate costs no matter what. From a site development standpoint, from a building development standpoint, the cost will go up. The one thing I want to bring into this, which is not directly about the site, but we've toured this building, we've met with the employees, we've seen the work conditions, they're not acceptable. So as we move forward, understanding that they're inadequate is not even a strong enough word for the work conditions. So I think that has to be brought into play as you think about how you want to proceed.
It's not going to be hard to improve on what we have here, I think is the bottom line there.
It's not hard to improve on work conditions, but they're not satisfactory.
We don't have a geologist in the room, but I'm just curious, in a major seismic event, it's likely to have a tsunami with it. I'm not sure what that likelihood is. Depends on depth and location, but if we do have a major seismic event, it was my understanding that we're likely looking at a tsunami event too.
Only if it's a Cascadia event. That's 18 and 10,000 years.
Can I ask a question? Oh, hello, I can't tell if it's. Can I ask a question?
Yes, is that Lisa? Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, I'm just curious. Is it possible to build one? I mean, this may be crazy, but can you build one building and have one section of it be category 4 and the other sections be of a lower category, or does that not work within one building?
The short answer. Oh, go ahead, Curtis.
Generally, that you really can't do that because you would have your lateral system that resists this wind and seismic or the tsunami all acts as one system. So you design it based on the same level of loads. On this particular site, designing for the seismic is not really an issue. We can deal with that easily. It's really a matter of, in order for the code to consider this a category 4 for tsunami, the essential facilities portion of it has to be high enough to stay out of the water. And the current code has made it so it's no longer optional at which level of tsunami that we design for. They want the maximum level of tsunami as your basis of design, which essentially puts our emergency facilities for communication and so forth on the 3rd floor of a building.
So because of systems being interconnected, that idea doesn't fly.
Correct.
Okay.
And I want to point out that, I mean, again, when I'm looking at this, it's a worst case scenario for the people in this city and for the people that are visiting. And so I am not inclined to say, well, okay, well, we can do it where we do a mix, which I think Curtis has just explained why that's not going to be possible. Why would a new building be there when Public Works would not, or the cash sites would not? Because we're going to be on a foundation that goes down 150 feet and is designed to deal with lateral loads, which Public Works is not, and the cash sites, I mean, they're designed for after the event, hopefully have stuff to be able to provide people to survive, but they're not operational in any way. Now, I'm going to stop talking about this, and y'all can keep it up, but you can see that I'm passionate about it. I've been to 2 cities after Category 5 storms, and it is, and those storms actually didn't have a water impact. It was just a wind impact, and have got a lot of training in trying to go ahead and deal with events like this. And a lot of the things that I hear people say, for example, Well, if the EOC goes down or the city hall or the EOC part goes down, then we could go and operate from the cash sites. That is pure wishful thinking. And so I am passionate. I know what I'm talking about from her dealing with hurricanes. And I know, and I've operated out of EOCs. And it has to be big enough that you bring in everybody when they get there. They've got to have a place to work. They can work in EOC, it gets really crowded. But it, to me, is all about how we take care of people after and not try to explain why we can't.
Is there a consideration of emergency vehicles at a different location?
What?
Consideration of having emergency vehicles in another location?
We have, the public works vehicles are in another location.
I think the discussion in terms of the surveys were police cars, where the location of police cars would be and how they would be affected by a tsunami or major disaster.
I think if there was a tsunami here, the police cars would probably be underneath the building and would probably be damaged or destroyed. But that's, again, 18 times in 10,000 years. And also, well, I'm sorry, I think that's the answer.
I think it's really, really easy to focus on the absolute worst possible thing that could ever happen. And I don't want to minimize it, but we have to build a city hall, as our architects have stated. This building is unacceptable. And we can keep relitigating the location and moving this round and round and round. But in order to move forward, I sense consensus among the council that this location is okay. Now we're currently discussing whether the EOC could be or maybe not located in this location. I'm willing to have that discussion, but in terms of moving forward with the city hall, I'd like to see us be able to do that and at least come to an agreement amongst ourselves about whether that's really what we'd like to do.
And I agree with you. I think we're at that point. We have looked at sites for schools. We've looked at sites for city halls, police stations, emergency management. I've been through all of that. Not, in this exact seat, but I wish there was someplace else.
Yeah.
I really do, but I don't think there is. And we cannot ask our city staff to work in these conditions. And so we.
I agree, Barb. I agree with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I think we all do,
Mm.
right?
Yes, absolutely. Especially the police.
And yeah, I'm with you.
Okay.
After 20 years of this conversation, I think it is time for us to move forward.
Right.
I'm glad we're having the conversation. My concern more is for having the conversation for the people who are concerned about the large events and what that situation is. So I see this as much for information about everyone who's listening and watching as it is for us moving through the process. I think past council has looked at it in depth. It's been talked about for 2 decades. But now it'd be nice to have buy-in from the community and for them to understand that this is probably the best action we can take.
Lisa, do you still have your hand up? You want to say something?
No, let me lower my hand.
Please, Lisa.
This technology, but no, I think that we're ready to move on the city hall. if we want to talk more about emergency management site, that's a different conversation. I think we ought to have to decide, though, if we want to try and do something different with that, or just go forward with City Hall as a Category 4 building, which is very, very expensive, but you know, if it's going to be the emergency management center, then, you know, emergency operations center, then it'll have to be Category 4.
I think that the best case is that if something were to happen and we were to need, the only place that would be available for us to work would be a building that was constructed to risk Category 4, having a whole city hall. So everybody's still working on the computer that they had, because if, unless everybody takes their computer and related equipment home every time, and they can somehow get to the EOC, or they don't lose everything that's at their home. The best case scenario is that we've got as many options as possible, that it's as normal for the people that are working in the Emergency Operations Center as possible. And it doesn't have to be, but to me, the standard is that we need to be at our best. And if we're making compromise after compromise, and if I want to talk to Jason, I've got to, you know, go walk around until I find somebody that saw him and I can catch up with him, that kind of stuff. That's this town. That's what this town deserves. And to go ahead and cut it back. And I'm not even sure why we're talking about cutting it back. I've not heard, you know, if it's a funding issue, you know, we can go ahead and address that. But by splitting, it costs you more to build it. And as far as, you know, the back, Rick is right with the backup under, you know, certain conditions, but the big one, if the Category 4 is not going to withstand it, neither is anything else that we've got that is currently in place.
I think it was just more, as Gary had indicated, that it's a discussion that we're willing to have.
Mhm.
It doesn't convince me at all that we should build it somewhere else. I tend to agree with what you're saying, not to minimize what Rick has brought up, but at the same time, it's like, how can we build this for the budget that we've established, which you've indicated probably is grown since that time, and everything that we're talking about is just adding to that. And I feel that I have a responsibility to the community to build something that's as fiscally responsible as we can.
No, I believe that there are options. And again, we're talking about a building that the people it's built for, at the time we started, we didn't want them to pay anything. And, you know, just find anybody else that builds a city hall or anything like that, you know, that there's a tax or something associated with that. We're trying to avoid that. And I think that there's still possibilities, but it's going to be some hard decisions to make. But I think that there are possibilities where we can still accomplish that. Or we can go ahead and cut back, or, you know, because again, yeah, I'm sorry. I think that there are options that we can go ahead and be able to go ahead and build the building that we're talking about. And we can scale it way back. And whatever direction you provide, we will go ahead and we will make it happen. But I think you can see that I'm a little passionate about this, and I've seen failures, and I think that the people here don't deserve to have to take that's risk. It's not our risk. That's a risk on all the people that would be relying on us to be at our best. And if we are willing to say, well, we'll take a chance on that, I think that's a huge mistake. But it's a decision, a policy decision. What level do we want to try to provide? And then you make it. And then we go ahead and we make it happen. Until that point, I'm going to argue as I have. And that's all.
Bruce, what does an emergency operations center look like?
It's going to be set up in different sections. I mean, we turn this place into emergency operations center.
I mean, is it
Yeah.
primarily communications that we're talking about and being able to coordinate with?
Yes, there will be an incident commander. They will be in charge of the emergency operations center. There's different places that are, you know, if you do it right and you have all the cavalry being able to show up in a short period of time, that sort of thing. You have the health department, school board, the highway department, power company, gas company, all those people are potentially there. They won't be, but we can go ahead and communicate with them. Because, I mean, we're talking about satellite internet is the level that we would be operating at. So where everybody else would be totally out of internet for a long time, we would be able to go ahead and start right up. And we would be able to talk to the state, potentially the feds, the county. I don't even know, and I have relatives that work there. What will happen with the county's EOC?
What do you count on?
Yeah, they only recently started to open it. And their entire staff is 3. And our staff would be larger because it's all of our employees. Their employees, or a lot of their people live in Astoria. And they're getting to that building would require them to be able to get across the bridge. And
From my experience in an EOC, if you're an EOC member, if you can't get to the EOC that, like, if you're part of this EOC, but you can't get there, you should report to the closest EOC you can get to. So my husband's EOC, we live across bridges. He's probably not going to get to Tigard to be part of that EOC. He's going to be on the Damascus Happy Valley world. And that's where he'll report to. Actually Sunrise Water probably is where he'll report.
But just to be clear, we've never been talking about becoming a tsunami evacuation site. Because I think there's a lot of confusion about that.
And this,
Not that.
the EOC, the EOC is not a place where everybody can come, in and sit. It's trying to get the things done, but to try to go a little bit more on your question, there's an incident commander that's responsible for making the decisions. Rick, do you want to cover that and what the different sections are?
When you're talking about what an incident operations center looks like, it's about the size of this room, but it has to be big enough for people to coordinate, communicate, and then also have rest periods and rotate around. There has to be a place for information to come in, put that together, plan it, and then send the information out. But it has to be sizable. When Bruce does talk about like the EOC at Public Works, that is not an adequate place to continue an operation. That's a starting place. It would be something about this size. And it gets very active. And the key is that it's functional. The key is when you have an emergency operations center, it has to be functional during those incidents where there's no power to the rest of the community. There's no internet to the next community and people are cut off. And that's really the key to your success. And it has to be a place where people can go, first responders and emergency volunteers can go, get information and start functioning.
And also, just if I can jump in there, we will have the arrangement we have right now. It's informal, but the fire department plans on working out of our EOC. One, their building is far from the risk category 4, but also if we're going to be dealing with things like what roads are open or closed, or what where do we know we have people that are hurt or that kind of thing, it makes no sense that they're doing the same thing a block away. And so we can go ahead and get them information. And so there will be people here that will be tracking that information. Some other people will be, talking to the state or whoever, and we'll be talking about conditions that we know. Okay, well, we have no information whatsoever from the north end, and we can't get there. And trying to find ways, how are we going to be able to go ahead and do that, and who can we send? And then just anything that's going to get done. Somebody's going to go ahead and take in the information. Somebody else is going to go say, Jason, how many people can you get there and how long will it take to get there? Or can they even get there? Those kind of things. All this information that is reality on the ground, all of a sudden starts to come into the EOC. and you start making the best decisions you can, and you change decisions based on new information. And if we find that there is a larger, maybe one of the hotels that has collapsed, well, we're trying to let people know that are on the other side of, the helpline or part of the cavalry, that we are dealing with that situation and we are overwhelmed with it. It's not a nice place to be. I mean, it's an extremely high pressure. Anything that's getting decided, anything that's happening other than, random volunteer efforts would be coming out of here or out of the EOC.
Gary, I have a little bit of a different answer to your question too, just another perspective on it. From a design point of view, I think EOC it'll look like the council chambers with additional storage elements and with additional load capacity for electrical loads, for communication loads, potentially a dedicated generator, and the storage capacity to make sure that in the case of an event, it can become and accommodate workstation for the people there. But in terms of its day-to-day, what does it look like? It will look like a council chamber.
Sam, you want to make a comment?
Actually, I was gonna ask a question, Curtis, to reiterate what he was saying about the fact that a class 4 building here, because the rules have changed on us since we kind of committed to this study, but it also requires us to be a tsunami site. Just want to confirm that is an absolute, correct?
So in the beginning of 2022, they adopted a temporary or a interim measure that has become permanent in the new code that just went into effect, where all category 4 buildings need to be designed for the maximum tsunami. And in order for it to be and what that requires is all the emergency services that must be available immediately after the disaster have to be higher than the maximum tsunami wave that they expect. For this site, the database is saying our maximum tsunami heights just under 59 feet, and our site elevations right around 33 feet. So we're looking at 26 feet approximately that we have to get the floor level for the emergency services.
Curtis, can I ask you a question, Curtis?
Yes.
Can you design for a seismic and wind event to the category 4, not designed to the tsunami event? Therefore, you're not a category 4, but you've designed to the seismic and wind event for 4.
Go ahead, Curtis. I'm sorry.
If you do that, you cannot classify the building as an essential facility. Up until this last code cycle, the jurisdiction it was optional whether they adopted the tsunami provisions or not. And on this code cycle, they made it mandatory for essential facilities, which is police and fire stations and your emergency services.
So does that mean it can't be it has to be a category 4 to have an EOC in it?
Correct.
Be an essential building.
I know, I heard essential building, does that equate to an EOC?
Correct. And what I said before is, are you building a city hall or are you building an emergency operations center with like a police station or a hospital or a fire station? They're separate machines.
What about a community like Seaside? Does that mean they can never build an emergency operations center or police station?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Because you have a community like Seaside, and it's all lower than what we have here in Cannon Beach. So you'd never be able to reach that 59 feet or whatever. And they have things that are essential facilities police stations, fire stations, all that. Pardon?
They're not building new.
Their new school and their new emergency operations center is above 97 feet.
Right, but I'm saying, so if there's anything that, when they finally have to replace a facility, does that mean that they cannot replace it in the city of Seaside? Or Gearhart? Oh, no, Gearhart's got some places that are higher.
They would have to make the floor level of whatever portion of it that supported those essential facilities above the tsunami line in order to be considered an essential facility.
Right, but so we have one, I think one location that can do that for sure, and that would be Southwind. And it doubles the cost. So I guess we have the capability of doing that, but in a previous conversation I had, I did not hear that we're talking about not being able to designate as an essential facility. That's relatively new. So if we were to build, if we were to build here, and we were category 4 in terms of seismic event, which is our major, most likely event to have to deal with. What, I don't know if you would even know this, Curtis, but what couldn't we do? Could not set up a EOC after a seismic event?
No, it's just that your building has to be tall enough that a portion of it stays out of the water. The lower portion of the building will be designed to resist the tsunami loads. It will get inundated, and your first floor and probably part of your second floor will get some serious water damage or destroy most of the contents. But the items needed to coordinate your emergency responses would be on the upper level that would make it through the tsunami and be fully functional afterwards. As far as dealing with seismic events, the building would have no issue going through the major seismic event and having all 3 levels be functional.
I had understood recently that it would be a category 2 or 3 for tsunami and category 4 for seismic, but not that the whole building would have to be up at 59 feet. So this is new to me, so I apologize if I was misinformed on that. That's something that we're gonna have to check. You guys are gonna have to give us information on that.
As architects, the information that Curtis just gave, do you envision a 3-story building or a large commercial 2-story building?
We have considered both of those options. And have started to do preliminary pricing on both of those options to inform our decision. I will say in the community responses we received, there was conflicting information from community members on the preference for direction. There were those communities members who preferred a taller 3-story building with a smaller footprint in order to get above that 26-foot height. There were other community members who felt fairly strongly that building something more like a tower was not preferred and preferred a lower building that was more in keeping with the character of the community and of Midtown.
Well, I mean, we already have height limitations in place that it sounds like we'd have to give ourselves some type of variance to.
Whether we go 2-story or 3-story, I would anticipate that in the process we will be requesting a variance.
Yeah.
I guess to clarify, maybe Curtis can speak to this. Is it a requirement that a police station be an essential facility? Because I think what you were alluding to, Bruce, is we can design for category 4 requirements for seismic and wind. That is the design basis of design criteria, but that doesn't make the entire building an essential facility.
See, and I think that I need help on what is the definition of an essential facility. Like if we have a facility that can withstand meet the seismic, But without, again, maybe doubling the cost to have to go to the equivalent of a 3-story or some 59 feet or whatever it's going to be. And the structure be built and operate as an emergency operations center, as a police station, or can it not be built unless we find a location that meets that height? So, I don't know, expect you to have the answer now, but that is huge.
So in my mind, I separate it a little bit. I think the criteria to which it will build and how it will perform from its code compliance and label as an essential facility. And that may be what you're getting at.
No, but and again, some of this is new to me, but in my previous thinking was that if we could achieve a risk category 4 and in seismic, which is our most likely event, as opposed to the absolute, 9.0 for a tsunami, I think that would solve the problems that I'm concerned about, which is more the seismic event and being able to operate. But I don't know what all that means. Does that mean that we could not build that and say that we would operate out of here?
Curtis, can you speak to that?
So if we can decouple them slightly, for category 4 building and seismic, it's designed for a higher level of performance under a major earthquake. It's intended to not suffer any serious damage that would prevent you from using the building. The tsunami is a little bit different in that not only do you have to deal with the loads being put on the building from the water, but if everything is inundated at some point, how much of the contents of the building will be usable after that water recedes. So in order for it to be an essential facility in relation to a tsunami disaster, whatever you need to operate your emergency responses and your communications center needs to not be damaged by the water, whether that's designed so that if it works after it's been submerged for a while, or if it's works because you kept it up out of the water entirely. And basically we're looking at about 20s, mid 20s feet of water on this site under the worst case tsunami. On most tsunamis, the ones that are more frequent would probably not get beyond the first floor. But if you hit that magnitude 9 earthquake off the coast and you hit the big tsunami, then you would have the second floor damaged as well. So
Curtis, I think that the question that is being asked is, can a police station be in a building that's not labeled an essential facility if it's related to if it's all coupled together with tsunami?
And I don't know if we had that answer, and I want not go on somebody to give us an off the cuff answer. So I think that's something that needs to be researched for sure.
The code specifically says that category 4 buildings are fire, rescue, ambulance, and police stations, and buildings, let's see, designated emergency preparedness, communications, and operations centers required for emergency response. It defines those as category 4 and requires you to design to the category 4 standards. And if you're inside the tsunami inundation zone, they require you to design for both this earthquake category 4 and the tsunami category 4.
So to paraphrase, to have the police station and the EOC, it would have to be above the 26.2 or whatever the number is. That floor would have to be above it for them to be in this building.
Can you repeat that? The top floor?
So the top floor, I think the number's 26 plus, so it's about 26 feet because of the rise in the site. So the police station and the EOC to be a category 4 would have to be above 26.2 or whatever the number is.
For
For the floor,
like a third floor?
right? Third floor or super first floor or however you want to,
So the building would obviously have to be higher than that to,
yeah, so you'd have another 14 or so feet above that probably as your total height.
I would like to look in this, in much more depth. Because I find it hard to believe that a community can build a structure. There has to be a 9.0. That's 18 times in 10,000 years.
Okay.
And that's not a high risk. It's a high risk if it happens. It's a high damage, but I would like to do more on what we can do or will they tell us we can't go in it or I don't know what they would possibly do. We're going to be so much better than almost anybody on the coast as far as our readiness. But if they're going to say that we can't do it, then we have to significantly regroup.
I'm not sure. Is that what we're saying?
I
If
don't know what we're saying. I mean,
I-
I know what I'm saying, but I don't know.
we're talking about risk category 4.
Yeah.
And to be an emergency operations center, you have to be a certain height and be able to withstand that load. So, I mean, haven't we always been talking about a category 4
I thought we,
structure?
I thought
We have, this information is new though, that states, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Curtis. You seem to have indicated that the police station is located at that height as well.
Curtis.
I think he's muted. There.
Sorry, my internet cut out on me a little bit there.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
You seem to have indicated that beyond the EOC capabilities of the structure, that the police department would be needed to be located at that level as well. Is that true?
I believe as long as we could operate the police department on a temporary basis out of the upper level, that for daily operation for the main portion of their services, it would be fine to have it on the first floor. But if we
Okay.
have a tsunami, we need to be able to actually use have what we need to continue operations.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
And for us to be, we need to, if that's the case, then we need to relook. And I think we maybe have 1 or 2 sites only.
I'm sorry, your last part of your statement.
That's the case, like, I've never been favorable with the idea that if we had a tsunami, it would take out the first floor, but we'd be okay. Jason's heard me say this. In my experience, a police station is not as necessary to be a category 4 is, like, for example, if we were going to use this room, that the city hall and the police station would be up there. I don't know.
I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
the building code.
This is a
Against.
requirement. And you can't do essentially the right thing unless you go way over this way. That's new. And but when we would talk before that, well, we could do a 2-story, but the first floor would be, destroyed. Well, it's like, if it's a $16 million building, you're probably losing, $8 million of your investment. So the idea of having anything sacrificial. So when we've had our discussions, first floor, I mean, the ground level has always been building over parking. But the idea of saying that, our council chamber would be, on that level doesn't make any sense. Maybe not even the second, maybe it would have to go up to the third. And I don't even know how big the footprint would have to be to accommodate that. We're talking about,
I understand what you're saying.
so we're all speculating at this point. So
And I agree with what you're saying is that we need some more information
Yeah.
and it would have been nice to have that to start with, but here we are.
Right.
So I think I would ask your company to please provide that type of information for us.
And I think what Curtis was saying is that the code just recently changed, so the decisions on the site were founded in information that was valid at the time that it was given.
I was still operating under those assumptions and clearly I'm wrong.
Now, does that mean our estimates that we've talked about are going to be different too? Because category 4 now requires an additional.
we're building more stories, we're putting more weight on the foundation, all those things. So yes, it's going to cost more.
Always going to be a category 4.
Yes. I
So
just didn't know if it was already, if the estimate was already calculated on category 4. But I don't know if it's the.
Not for the tsunami.
Up until the last code cycle, the jurisdiction, the city had it was under their purview to decide how big of a tsunami they wanted to design for. And we were looking at the smaller tsunamis that are likely to be more regular, much more likely to occur. But the last code cycle, the state has taken that away from the local jurisdictions and put it back into their court. And we can put a request into the state and see whether they will let us design to that lower level tsunami. But I won't hold out a whole lot of confidence on them approving it.
So when did that change?
It was a temporary ruling that went into effect at the beginning of last year, and it became a permanent ruling with the code in November.
Okay.
Oh, just a few months ago is the permanent.
Sam, did you want to add anything to that? Any words or what?
Thing to add, and I may be going out on a limb here, but I have also reviewed this section of code. And again, it is new, so there may be some interpretation here, but the way I have read it is that there are examples of facilities that make sense to be essential facilities. Like Curtis was saying, it lists police stations and fire stations. Where I am less clear is that section of code mandates that those type of facilities be essential facilities. And if that is the current interpretation by the state, that it's mandated that a police station be an essential facility, then my next question would be, what elements of the police station are then mandated to be an essential facility? And I don't know that particular question is answered.
It is a much more expensive building. That's one factor that we need to really consider. The other factor, and it was mentioned, was the fact that we're now looking at something that really does not fit the character of the town, let alone the midnight area. So that becomes another element that we must consider when we're doing it.
Well, then I guess you could build something that fit the town character completely away from town at an increased elevation.
Or I just kind of address what Bruce was coming back to, was the fact that City Hall is not an essential building. It's the police station and the EOC that are essential. If the building survives, it can still be used as an EOC. just because. It doesn't have to be designated an EOC. It does have to be designated a police station if we have a police station here. So that becomes the next element. Do we separate?
That's why we need to do the research and also, can we build a facility that is light years ahead of where we are now? Or to at least plan for it and try to get to that point and have the state say no to where we can't afford it. And then, so we stay here. I mean, is that the state's intent?
So I think,
It's beyond architectural talk. I think we're also talking legal interpretation.
I think to what Curtis is saying, so I think there's multiple questions we can request of the state. It's for clarification. First question being, would they allow us to use a moderate tsunami? And then that comes to, and still be classified as a 4. Does a police station have to be classified as a 4? Those are the questions that we can ask the state and get a formal interpretation of, because the code was just put in November, they'll be expecting questions. Just this.
Okay. I'm trying to think, what more can we do? I think we need to go back and look at the information that's been compiled about the comments. Get a better idea of whatever it is we build. If we're talking about sustainability, what levels are we talking about? But the main thing is to focus on what can we build, and listening to, the definitions of what was the not existing, what essential. If something is essential, if something's a category 4. Are we completely locked out of doing a police station, for example, on this site? And I feel strongly that the whole building should be a risk category 4. But if the police station cannot be built here, then we've got a whole nother discussion to have.
Can I just clarify one more thing? Any building built here could be a category 4 structure. It's the tsunami level that is the added problem.
Right.
So any building can be built 1 story, 2 stories, whatever. They're built to be earthquake proof. It's that tsunami level that we're really running into as being the point.
Right. And it also sounds like, Sam, if we can't do that if it involves a police station. That's where the difference, I think, starts to change.
Well, I think that what Curtis was saying is that if the police can operate out of an area that's above 26 feet at the time of the tsunami event, then that would meet the classification of the essential facility as well, so that they don't have to have all their offices functioning. If say that their offices were on a lower floor, they don't have to have they have to have a place to operate out of.
Yeah.
That there's good and bad in that.
And we have been strategizing as we move forward, which components of the police station make sense to be on a ground floor, on a mid-level, and potentially on a higher level. Something like storage associated with the police department that is part of the police station, but maybe palatable to be on the ground level. So I think there are nuances here that would require state interpretation.
And it may change the financial picture of looking at a site like Southwind again. Ouch.
I think what it would do is it would drive us to making the decision to go to Southwind as opposed to what would be my mind, a better situation. And I just question whether the building code can make you do that.
We will get an interpretation requests on these 3 items in.
What kind of a timeframe?
Historically, the state has actually moved very quickly. So I would imagine that we would know within weeks their interpretation.
I want to hold off on making that request. I want to work with our council and strategize on what the question would be. So I don't want to just rush to send.
We can certainly draft initial requests and have it reviewed by everyone.
Sure. Okay, that would be good.
What are the negatives about separating City Hall and its day-to-day operations with police station and emergency operations?
You'd be building, you'll be building that space twice.
Yeah.
And if it was going to be the emergency operations center in the police department, there really is no other use for it other than, maybe meetings or something, but it doesn't become storage or offices or anything like that.
Not a police station, not a police department.
No, if this space was created in the police department, it has to be just as available as it is now as a council chamber. So you have to create, you have to build that space twice. One of the other things is that the better, less disruptive you are to the people that are having to make the decisions. For example, the office being, their offices are in the same building, that kind of stuff. You'd be talking about picking up and lifting. And unless everybody took all their tech equipment home every night, you'll be building that again in that EOC. So you would actually build it as the EOC because there's, if the building was lost, there's no computers or anything for anybody to use, so it's senseless. It just puts you on like a weird spin into silliness. But it's obviously much better if all employees that are going to work in the EOC, if their things are in the same building. Otherwise, where they go, they have nothing. And so we have to build it so everything is there, all the tech is there, everything else.
I think in general, separating the functions there's a loss of efficiency in several aspects. So there's a loss of efficiency for scheduling. If we're separating the two, we need to consider the time frame for getting the police station built and where it is functioning in the interim if we're building here. So there's a logistic schedule component. There's a loss of efficiencies in terms of shared building amenities. So there is a certain amount of square footage dedicated to everyone in the building, things like break rooms, potentially maybe or maybe not showers. So there's elements that would be overlapped if we are co-located. And then there's the cost, like Jennifer mentioned before. If they're separated, there's site costs, there's investigative costs, design costs, costs that would be duplicated.
Yeah, I'm mostly interested in the interaction between police department and city hall and staff and if that's a big issue.
See, to me, you can't staff an EOC with the police department. They're out. You want them to be out.
That have an EOC in a police department.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
The police department doesn't have anybody. Police department has however many people during the day but all the people that you're going to want in the EOC, the public works director, the finance director, the city manager, everybody else that would be making decisions for those things, they're not there. But you have an EOC in the police department building. But you would have to make sure that it's, operational like that.
So an emergency staff would have to go to the other location
Right, and it has to be ready. Yeah, and then it has to be ready. If the radios and all that stuff, it's like, well, we'll bring them with us. The building's destroyed. We're not bringing them with us. The computers, we're not bringing them with us. All that kind of stuff.
In all locations, staff still has to get to the location.
Right.
So back to the conversation we had a little bit ago, can the staff get to whatever location it is? And what's the backup if they can't?
And over time, they will, because the EOC will operate for probably at least will be City Hall for like 18 months, because that's where you're, when people want to come in and make emergency repairs, they have to go to the building department. They can't skip that. So the building, it has to be someplace that you can get to easily while those kind of things are happening. all that. I'm just frustrated because I understand it from the building standpoint, but it makes no sense from an operation standpoint. So I'm frustrated, but that's okay. So we'll strategize with CETA. And when we have an answer, or we think we'll be getting an answer, we will go ahead and set up a dedicated meeting for that. And I'm not sure if there's a whole lot more can be done. I think that this is, mission one right now to get this sorted out.
I would like to make one comment. And it's that I think when we were approaching it, we assumed that we would hit that 26-foot for the EOC pieces. I think that's how, when we look at the code, how we would assume that we would have to have approached this building. So that the site could work with that parameter with a variance for the height.
Sure, I completely agree with that statement. It's just whether we as a community are willing to, because this is all new information to us. I don't think we had that assumption. I thought we could build it 2 stories. Maybe we could have a height variance that encroached a little bit, but what's our height limit at
Be
28?
20,
28 and a half.
20, yeah.
That half's important.
Okay, it might get us past or not.
100%.
But what you're describing is a building that's probably 40 feet tall.
Close to it.
Is that the first level?
No,
That's the total building height for 3 levels.
right now, I would say that we have things to get back to you on. Contextually, even taller buildings can be made contextually appropriate. So I think that from an architectural standpoint, I believe we can make it, if this location is chosen, we will make it contextually appropriate.
Well, this has been.
We kind of all agree that this is currently the best site, but there are questions to be answered.
The best of the worst.
Yes.
We don't know till those questions are answered, actually.
Right.
Right. So we will stay tuned for the questions.
Okay.
Any other items we need to know?
We can make it a huge giant lighthouse.
Yeah.
What's that? Huh?
Decide to make a giant lighthouse.
Okay, does anybody have anything for good of the order?
Adjournment.
That would be good.